Welcome to the podcast, Scattered, One Person's Search for the Story Behind Human Remains. My name is Yvonne Chorlin. I'm a physical anthropologist and archaeologist. In other words, I like dead people. In this podcast, I explore topics related to dead people, from searching for human remains in forensic contexts to mortuary practices in modern and archaeological contexts, and everything in between. I offer information, perspectives, and insights directly from the mouths of researchers, as well as experiences of people who work with remains. All of this aims to provide you with information on subjects that aren't really talked about, don't seem to be a priority, or they can be very misunderstood. I hope you enjoy. Hello, dear listener. Welcome to the Scattered Podcast. This is part 2 of episode 27 with Brian Paulsen. We are going to go right into the interview without preamble, so if you haven't listened to part 1, I highly recommend you go back and do that. So please, again, go back to part 1, listen to that, and then come back to this, part 2, and listen as I interview Brian Paulsen on landfill searches. Okay, so a search protocol kind of was established through 9/11.
Correct.
Do you know anybody else? Like, is that kind of the standard now for searching either like catastrophes or any times there's, I guess, there's a lot to sift through.
Yeah, literally and figuratively. Yes.
Yeah.
They that's one thing I didn't, that I wish I had inquired about, was what was their methodology to searching in the landfills and such. A couple of them volunteered, and they seemed to do something very similar. They brought the trash out. There were a couple that actually just sent investigators or law enforcement only in to the landfill, and they would search an area, and then they would be done. So there's not a lot of, I don't have a lot of information on what others did as far as their methodology.
It sounds like there might be a bit of a continuum too in search methods. Okay. All right. So from our previous conversations, it sounds like this case where you had to go in and search the landfill for this boy prompted you to then do research on landfill searches.
So I came out of the landfill and which had really consumed, basically 8 months of my life. And the whole investigation there were nights out driving around saying, okay, maybe he went there, just letting your mind kind of take you and not really saying, okay, I gotta put an end to this. So I was working 18, 20-hour days, sleeping for about 4 and then getting up again. But I lost my train of thought.
Method.
I know what it was. I got done with this case in August, and we knew we had the trial coming up the next spring, but I had all this time on my hands, and I thought, what am I going to do? And I'd always thought about getting my master's degree, and I had taken a crime scene, a year-long crime scene course that was put on by a community college in conjunction with a hospital in Lincoln, Nebraska, the state capital. Nebraska Wesleyan had taken that over and turned it into a master's program. One of the instructors and eventually the dean of the program was one of our searchers. She came out. Her background is in archaeology, and specifically forensic archaeology. Dr. Connor, and she came out, searched. I think only one day, maybe 2. But she was one of those that had to get back because of other commitments. So I drove her back down to her car, and she was saying, hey, this is my background. This is, I think what you're doing is exactly how it should be done. Just continue. If there's anything you need help with or questions, please let me know. And really, we had, that was kind of where we had formed our relationship. Well, after I got done with the case, I said, let's go get my forensics. And it was right there in Lincoln, Nebraska. So it was an hour drive for me. And so I went in. It was an accelerated course, and met with a number of cohorts that were doing it as well. Some of them that I knew, and some of them that I would become good friends with. But we started our master's program, and it was pretty early on that I identified that, gosh, I want to know, what were our chances? At what point should we have stopped? At what point, or what should we have done differently? And I just wanted to know more, and really, if I ever had to do it again, refine how I would do it. And so as part of my thesis, Dr. Connor sent out an email blast to a number of archaeologists and said, "Hey, are you aware of any landfill searches?" And then I sent written letters to state patrols or highway patrols, depending on what their designation was, as well as the state's attorney's office, because I felt they would have helped at least prosecute or investigate or have knowledge of it within their states. And then all the large departments, so Dallas, New York City, if they had a specific investigative unit, I sent a letter to them. So all in all, I probably sent out 100 to 125 letters. My boss at the time, I had made chief 12 years before. No, I apologize. I had made chief about 3 years before this, and I made chief in 99. And my city manager, I went to him and said, "Can I use official letterhead for my research?" And he said, "Absolutely. This is going to help law enforcement, whether it's us or somebody else. Yes, please do." I told him I will pay postage out of my own pocket, but I felt it would be more official on letterhead. And I believe that was also some of the reasons some agencies did respond. It was of interest that the letter would go out, and it went to one department. They would say, "Oh, but you need to probably contact this department because I know they had one." And it was a smaller agency that there was just no way I could send out that many letters. One in particular was a case in Southwest Colorado. That was somebody else, probably Denver PD, that said, "Hey, we didn't have one, but so-and-so down in the Southwest corner, you might want to reach out to them." And we reached out to them as well anytime we got that information. I should also say that my thesis also was a presentation at the International Forensic Archaeology Conference in St. Louis, and I don't recall the year. It probably had to have been 2008, I believe.
Did you know I'm going to go look it up?
Yeah, absolutely. And quite honestly, that's where I met Kimberly, and then other components of that book, Forensic Archaeology book, that where my research is published. There were a couple others that were there as well, and I believe one was from the UK. So there were some of those crime scenes, those unusual crime scenes, were presented that day, and so then we looked at some others. One of my cohorts in the program, actually, his thesis was on decomposition and different. Not stages, but different speeds of decomposition in controlled environments. Because we knew that the landfill was, as I said, was 32 degrees. And, when we were in there in July, and then we also knew it was sealed from oxygen as well. So, or a lot of oxygen.
Yeah, that would affect.
So,
yeah.
So he actually did his using pig cadavers.
Yep.
To work on the decomp side of it. So we kind of worked hand in hand and really kind of discovered some of the information from each other, just off of those two, off of his and mine.
Nice. Okay. So when you sent out these letters, were you just asking them if you could talk to them, or were you sending them a survey? What was the level of engagement you were looking for?
I was hoping that they would reach back out. Obviously, they had all of my contact information, and it was a survey form of letter. And basically, I'm doing research, and this is my institution. This is the agency that I work for, but my educational institution is Nebraska Wesleyan. And did you have are you aware? Did you have a landfill? Were you aware of any landfills nearby you or in your state? And would you provide me with that information or contact information? And then several of them I would follow up and try to get a hold of a detective within that agency. Even so, I kept track of who I mailed the letters to, and then would reach out to a number of those and say, okay, it's been reported that you've had a landfill search. Otherwise, what about this? And then we obviously, that great time saver, I just Googled landfill searches in the United States. And I actually came up with a couple that I had to send additional letters out to because they were, I discovered them on the internet, but hadn't sent a letter to them.
Right. So, didn't have it highlighted in your chapter. About how many responses did you get? I know it was a pretty low number.
Yeah, it was. And a lot of that, I think, had to do, quite honestly, a lot of it had to do with nobody. I mean, there's such a time frame that it could have occurred. And I think it also showed, when I looked at it, you saw more landfill searches occurring as I started to do my research than before 5 years before or so, there weren't that many landfill searches. And because I had dated them all, kind of built a timetable that I didn't even put into my thesis. But there were definitely an increase of landfill searches that were starting or had occurred and were starting to occur. So we were one of those accelerating there in Nebraska.
Very interesting. Okay, so I have here, the results are gathered from 46 searches provided from verified, reliable sources. And then an additional 5 searches not used in the results were for evidentiary purposes and not the recovery of human remains.
Yes.
Okay, out of 100 to 125.
About a 30% return.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know
and
what? 30%, that ain't bad.
No, it's not. I actually thought it would be more. I thought we'd have more landfill searches up to that point. And I'm guessing that it was underreported or underdiscovered because there was really no way to reach out. In hindsight, I probably should have sent it out to the fraternal organizations, your national associations of chiefs of police, or the police officers associations of each state, and as well as, on the sheriff's side as well. And then went from there. Most states have like drug investigator conferences, and it's like, okay, let's go to those conferences. We talked about going to the International Association of Chiefs of Police and having a booth there. We didn't, based solely on cost, but tried to reach out to anybody and everybody we could.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about your results. So you did mention before that 30-day mark when it comes to the search. That's kind of the tipping point.
Yeah. Yep. And then we started to look at the recoveries that in the research and the responses I got back. You started looking, and then I think there was only one recovery out of all of those that occurred 30 days after the event. It's very important, obviously, in the York, Nebraska case of 6-hour recovery. It's very important from time of death or time of discovery to the time you enter the landfill. That also affected it as well. So the shorter amount of time from death to entering the landfill, the higher the probability of recovery. And then obviously that recovery, you could push it, but at 30 days, it was distinctly against the search at that point. At day 30, the likelihood of recovery is very, very low.
That's very interesting, especially considering the detailed records that Waste Management keep. You wouldn't think that the time of the search would be so fixed and so short, because you would know that kind of where the remains were that you were looking for.
You're absolutely right. it's a direct contrast, because if you, with all the information that landfills store, that you'd be able to go in and go right to that point. And my search that I led was a good example. We knew where we were going, but we hit that 30-day window, 29-day window, I think it was, and we chose not to go any further. There's a lot of background, and I don't want to say interference, but there's a lot of background movement politically. Okay, because in my case, the media was there every day. I gave a media report when I left the landfill every day. So people were saying, a lot of, there's the people that say, I hope he never stops. And then there are other people say, get him out of there, get those people out of there. Let's go on operating normally. It affected the landfill. I mean, obviously they're moving trash that they normally wouldn't have. It changes their record keeping, because the trash coming in during July was being taken to a different spot. So it changes their record keeping. It's like, okay, this isn't June 30th, trash is here, but all the January trash is over into a different phase of the landfill. And honestly, as well as the operation, when we went into the landfill every day, they used a measure of dirt, and generally anywhere from 12 inches to 18 inches of dirt to seal the trash. While we were in there, they changed operations, and they were spraying it with a coating that was sealing the trash, not having used the dirt, allowing to put more trash into an area. When they put that trash, all the trash that was either the overburden or what we searched, they pushed back in, and they, at the end of that day, when they were pushing it in, they sealed it with this, I call it an exoskeleton. And I believe I know I did in my thesis, I wrote, much like a dipped ice cream cone. You put it in, you pull it out, and it hardens, and it saved them a tremendous amount. They actually had a hole where left over when they put all the trash back into the hole that we had dug out, because they weren't putting a foot to 18 inches of dirt on top of each day. So they were just basically sealing it with a much thinner layer.
Right.
So there's a lot of pressure, and that's some of what I've been researching or reading on the searches for the Indigenous women in Canada, is the pressure and who's going to pay for it. And we were fortunate enough. Not saying it's right, but we had a young boy who was murdered and put in a dumpster, and there was more of I think there's a stronger desire to recover youth or children in a heinous crime like this over just the average citizen. And I don't know that that's fair, and I have nothing to support that. But in my experience has been, is an adult victim of crime is not looked on as deeply as a child. So I think the pursuit of a child in a landfill, that's like no hands barred. We're going in, we're going to take whatever we can to recover. So, but those outside mechanisms, that outside work, is a lot of pressure on the folks that are operating the landfill, as well as the people that are searching. Most of my agency was at the landfill. We required them. Obviously, we had to cover the streets in our town. We had a couple of our officers who had young children. They said, I don't want to be in there. I don't want to be the one that finds that. Okay, then that kind of designates you. You'll stay on the streets. The rest of us will go to the landfill. And that worked out well.
Right. So I just want to go back to the results of your study. It says here, of the 46 cases, searches were successful in 20 of the cases reported. So that's under 50%.
Yeah. Yep.
That's pretty disappointing. And then in 25 searches where the duration of the search is known, 13 lasted 7 days or less. And if the time frame is extended to 30 days, an additional 7 searches were added, so up to 20 then.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important to know that it's not going to be successful. You really have to accept that right at the beginning, that there is a distinct possibility that searching a landfill, you will not be successful for what you're looking for. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct. And I don't know. there was nobody at the time that we started our search. There was nobody that gave me or probably had that information. And I think we still would have went in again, going back to the information that we had, all the solid information we got from the landfill, all the information that they record. I still probably would have went in, but I would have felt more pressure. I believe that I would have felt more pressure as we went in, starting getting into the late teen days, as well as that third week, the 21st day, saying, gosh, we got 9 days, and pushed harder. We might have had an injury. We might have had something negative come out of that whole search. So, but again, that information wasn't readily available to us at that time.
Yeah. You could have had another level of mental health because of the anxiety to finish or to find something.
Yeah, I totally agree. Going in, even into the middle of the search, the halfway point, I still felt we were going to be successful. And I think everybody out there was feeling that same way. And when I say out there, those that were in the landfill. We took one day. It was, again, go back to the regional media and interest. We took one day, the prosecutor's office took one day, one afternoon, and said, we'd like to bring the media in, but we don't want them to have access to the general population. So let's stop the landfill at lunch. We'll feed them. They can go on their way, and then we'll have the media come in. They got in. They were able to get their video footage. They were able to ask some of the law enforcement questions about how long, what's it like, those types of things. But we didn't subject the general population to that. But it really eased the pressure. There were still daily briefings at the gate at the end of each day. But we took an afternoon to make sure that they had the information they wanted. We initially had helicopters flying over and getting video footage and such while we were searching. We had another individual. We laugh about it. I smile about it now, but he was a reporter for the Omaha World Herald. And every morning he knew what time we went into the landfill. We'd gather, we'd start basically migrating out on those trailers at about 8 o'clock. And for those that went in early, that drove our own vehicles back into the landfill, we saw him get dropped off on the road and walk down the fence every day to the same spot. And he sat there all day and watched us. And I know because he took pictures that I eventually got a couple of with a telephoto lens. And he was over there taking pictures. He was the only one that had really thought about, hey, where can I be if something happens? And every day he was out there, and diligently he was sitting there, and he knew that we would quit at 3:30 or 4 o'clock when we reached the point of quitting, and you would see him kind of march out, and car would pick him up. And we always talked about the old cartoons where the sheepdogs and the wolves are checking in and greeting each other at the time clock. And it's like, yeah, here he is. He's coming in, so we can get started. And tried to make light of the situation. It was a serious time for all of us, and just tried to make light of that situation.
When I was working on the Picton investigation, we were warned right at the very beginning, because there was quite a number of us that were employed as civilian technicians, and we're all anthropologists and archaeologists. And so we were not law enforcement, but we were warned at the very beginning that we would be approached by media and to not comment and to direct them to our commanding officer. And I was approached a couple of times, and I found it very disconcerting, because there would be no preamble, hey, I'm, so-and-so journalist, reporter, whatever, I'd like to talk to you. No, it was right out. Hey, did you find anything? How much are you getting paid? It was very abrupt and in your face and disruptive. And I was wondering if your volunteers had any experiences like that.
None of that was reported back to us. We really tried diligently to protect them. Generally, obviously with our general public. We, at the beginning of this case, we had no idea where the boy was. It was January, so we had freezing temperatures at night. During the day, we were seeing 30s and 40s. So we were doing this I call it the ground search, for basically about 9-10 days. mostly law enforcement. We had people on horseback. There was the sheriff's posse. They came out. We had other agencies that were sending people out. We actually didn't put a restriction on anybody. We had a younger news reporter who said, well, I can't get any information, so I'm going to volunteer. She actually volunteered, and she went out with a group, but she was asking them questions. But at that time, again, it was only first responders, and they knew that they really couldn't discuss the case. She did do the human side. Why are you doing this? And a lot of them say, we're law enforcement or we're fire, rescue, whatever they were. We just believe that, hey, somebody calls and needs help, and first responder, and in this line of work, we're going to respond and we're going to help where we can. But she was out there and she searched just as much as anybody else. Because I at the end of the first day, I asked the group that she was with, is she a bother? Is she being a burden to you? And they assured me that she wasn't. And had she been, I would have asked her not to come back. And but she wasn't. She searched for, I think, 2 days, maybe 3 days. And then after that, didn't search anymore. And she may have been the last 3 days of the ground search. And then when we called that off, saying we have nowhere to look, and then that was January. And then April, after his outburst, we all met, the sheriff's office and the state patrol, FBI, all the 4 core agencies, 5, I guess, with the crime scene unit. But we just kind of went through the case again. We ended up searching a sand pit because we thought that was the only open water that was open in January. And so we searched that sand pit, found nothing of significance. So, and there was a lot of experimenting. I shouldn't say a lot. There was some experimenting that was going on early on in the search, the ground search. We had 2 units of cadaver dogs that responded. One out of Sarpy County, Iowa, and one out of the Kansas City area. One of the cadaver dogs out of the Kansas City area actually was in the landfill with us, and she spent a significant amount of time. She didn't do it towards the end. She had to go back to work, but her and her dog were in the landfill, and she was using it to develop her own research. She was obviously placing cadaver material in the landfill and seeing if her dog could locate it. And we watched her, and the dog alerted. We also watched the dog. He was in there. They were in there. We had some illegal dumped material, came from the hospital. Well, let me step back. It didn't come from the hospital. It came from the family. They had a family member who was injured, needed medical attention, went to the emergency department, which was probably 6 miles from the landfill. He was treated, and then all of his clothes, all of his belongings were thrown into a sack at the hospital. Well, the family didn't want to do anything with it because they had been cut off of him. So they basically just threw it into the landfill. So we had medical waste that came from the family. The dog actually alerted, and you talk about that anxiety, you talk about a sense of hope. When that dog alerted that he had found cadaver and it wasn't planted or placed by his handler, it was like, oh my gosh, here we are. We're finally culminating. We're going to be successful. Hopes are up. And then, so we really slowed down the operation. At that point, the folks up top knew something was going on because there's no more trash coming up. And we decided at that point, we told them, if something happens down below, your work up here will slow or not, and eventually will stop because we're not sending anything up. And they knew something was going on because no more trash was leaving. And we were hand searching, and using the excavator as much as we could. And finally discovered this bag of clothing that had human blood in it. And it's like, gosh, well, it solidified that the dog could do it, could work in that environment. Again, no help to our case.
Right. Yeah. Very disappointing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm conscious of the time. So what have you learned between, doing this landfill search, a few years ago and then doing your research? What are some lessons moving forward? Because you did mention to me before that you found out there's no database that collects information on landfill searches.
No, probably I have found nobody that has probably more knowledge than the National Center for Exploiting and Missing Children here in the United States. They have a resource there that consults with a lot of the landfills. But other than that, I'm not sure of anybody that's even tracking landfills at this point. I think there's more knowledge about it. And obviously, with the internet and the explosion of the internet and the availability of information, Google searches are producing more. I was receiving, obviously, my business card went out at several of the events, as well as that archaeology conference in St. Louis. And those folks that took those, they were sending me information, news clippings. So I was able to get a few more gathered from there. One of really no value to my research, the perpetrator wanted the body to be found and wanted it to be a shock value. He actually put the body in a recliner on top of the landfill over on the East Coast. Stuff like that kind of jades the research. So that sets off in a separate pile, basically, because it's like, that's not really of value to us. No. But just gathering that information, just kind of keeping track, watching what's going on. And I have to admit, I wasn't looking outside of the United States. So when the media in Canada started talking about the indigenous females that were in the landfill, in the landfills, two separate ones, I gave them my opinion. I said, if you can get there in 30 days, I didn't know that Canada does the data gathering like the United States, which is foolish of me because they do. They said that they have a good idea of where they would start. There's a lot of contrast and again, I'm talking, we had a young boy, 4 years old. There was a lot of interest. There was a lot of community drive. Let's go get this kid. Let's make sure we get this boy recovered. This is the right thing to do. So again, it was very low expense. We had our major contractors, those excavators were coming from our major contractors. The dump trucks were coming from contractors. We were using a little city dump truck that was probably moving about half of what those big dump trucks from the contractors were moving, but he was still there. He was still doing it, and every little bit helped. And we had contractors that were coming in. Private contractor came in. It's a one-man operation. He spent a couple, 3 days with us using his excavator, all donated. The food, there was no cost. The water, no cost. We had folks in the area who wanted to do something and would come up, and they knew that we came back for lunch, but they would come to the gate carrying boxes of cookies and cupcakes and things like that, all donated. The equipment was all donated, the gloves, everything. There was the Sarpy County Attorney's Office had one individual, Curtis, who just was phenomenal in gathering all this stuff. And I think he told me that there was one business who said, no, we can't do anything. But every other business that he approached over that 30-day window said, absolutely, we will. And then he was also part of that major debrief where we had that banquet. The governor of Nebraska came in, recognized the department for our work. A number of citizens had written letters, actually, quite honestly, to the president. We got a letter from the president as well as his photograph saying, good job. Things like that. So people were appreciative and in the community, in the region, really. And they did whatever they could. And we tried to get a thank you out to anybody and everybody. The Dairy Queens in July are busy, but they'd send up 50, 60 dilly bars and Buster bars. That was the other one. So, those are the types of things they were driving out, giving those. And it's like, oh, wow. So you think that you're not doing anything as far as for the community, for the region, but you're under notice, and you don't think about that. I wasn't thinking about that when I was searching. It was after the fact that it was like, oh, that was a little more significant than I thought. But as far as the research that and or the information you talked about, it'd be nice if there was a database. We electronically keep records, and I can tell you in the system that I use now, there is a location there is a category of locations, and you could put a landfill search in there. So it'd be much easier to store, but the compliance, the voluntary compliance of, gosh, is everybody collecting that information? as a small agency. This was a town of 7,000 that I was the chief of. We weren't really interested in anything other than if it was happening in our parks and our schools, within our community. I doubt that we would have recorded that as a landfill search. We would have said the murder happened here. The landfill search was supplement to that. And it was a significant enough event. A lot of people still remember it. I obviously will remember it, but just a little more detail in the records keeping. And that can be easily stored in agencies and then at the state level as well.
And sometimes it takes a little bit of insight and distance before you can see the linkage, and that, that actually, we should record that because that all linked to whatever, and that helped us down the road. Yeah. So sometimes it's not apparent at the time, but definitely becomes clearer the more distance you get from it. Yeah.
And, my research was probably 5 years. I'm trying to think, probably 5 years, started 4.5, 5 years after the landfill search. But, and it was fresh in my mind, obviously, even at that point, but it wouldn't be that hard to even go back and correct something and say, okay, this was the landfill search. Regionally, and definitely within that community, there are people that probably in their 20s that would remember that till well into their 60s and 70s. And that was when you were talking about our volunteers and the general public, we limited it to, we originally said 18 and above. And then we had a first responder come out from a neighboring agency, and she had a son, I think it was 17, and her daughter was 16. She said, hey, would you mind if they come out? And I said, only if they're with you can they come out. So she brought her son and daughter, and they searched as well. But those were the youngest two out there. They ranged, I'll guarantee you, they ranged into the 60s and 70s that were out there searching as well.
Yeah, I found that too, that the older people to the retirees, they're the ones that have the time, that are able to come out, help the search, and give, not just the hours, but days, sometimes weeks to an effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of our everyday guys was one of those elderly guys. I can still tell you right now, he wore a straw hat and he had a white long sleeve shirt every day. And his name was Tom. His first name was Tom. And when we started looking and counting, we said, well, who's Tom? Who's Tom? He was there every day. And it's like, he has to be the guy with the hat. And sure enough, when he showed up at the banquet, we said, are you Tom? And he said, yeah, my name's Tom. And we said, oh, well, we were wondering. And we kind of figured that's who you were. That was your name. And you were there every day. And he goes, well, I don't want any more, acknowledgement than that. You tell me that at this point is all that I need, that you recognize that I was there every day. And I said, that's perfect. He eventually, a number of businesses at that debrief, a number of businesses donated something. We had a weekend in Kansas City. We had several weekends in Omaha, weekend in Des Moines, that were gifted. And we just started drawing names of everybody who was there. And I hope everybody got something. I don't know that is a fact, but I do know that Tom did get something, and he was very appreciative of that. And it was just a small token for the amount of time and effort that he gave us.
Would it be fair to say that your landfill search, the success of it, and I'm not saying, success because it went well, even though, the remains were not found, that the search itself went well, that success can be directly attributed to community support? Oh,
absolutely. There is no doubt about that success, and obviously discouraged for the first few days, week afterwards. It's like, gosh, what could I have done different? What could we have done different? But boy, looking back on that, and you talk about the number of people. Now, 300 showed up for the banquet, but there was probably 500 or 600 people that were there when you started looking at every roster that was signed in and the duplications. So only about 50% showed up. But to bring 600 people into a landfill and search at various times and dates, various weather conditions. We had rain a couple of times. The heat was pretty overbearing a couple of days. But to have that many people, absolutely it was a success. And it wouldn't have been a success without the support of that community. There was community involvement much larger than I originally thought. I thought our community of 7,000 is bearing the brunt of this. But in looking back, the region really was supportive of for the entire event. If we had said in January, hey, we need this, they'd have come as much as they did in July when we were in the landfill.
Well, do you know what, Brian? You asked. You and your department asked for help. So it all starts with the ask, and then the community can jump in and deliver. So it takes two, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's that work. I mean, we use the media every day. When we decided back in the landfill, away from the media, we decided we were going to open it up to the general public. We weren't getting through enough trash. We went to the media, and our media report that day was, we need help. We're going to open it up to the public. This is what you do. And I mean, and they asked their questions because they're going to do a story. And that night, I didn't see every news, but I know 2 stations that covered it and said they need help. They're asking for help. And I'll be honest, I thought, gosh, we might double our force. We might go from 20 people to 40 people. And then when you have 109 people roll in the next day, we just kept shaking our head. It's like, what are we doing? How are we going to do this? And that we really exploded the operation from there. We didn't have we were taking them out in vehicles, and then we got the trailers, and then we decided lunch. And, our Salvation Army was there every day. They cooked us breakfast, or excuse me, not breakfast. They cooked the lunch. The food would come in and they would cook it, or they'd keep it warm, and then they would hand it out. They were walking around talking to us, just kind of support. It was just wonderful to have the Salvation Army there as well.
Wow, amazing. All right. Well, Brian, thank you very much for talking to me.
You bet,
thank
absolutely.
you very much for work on that search. Thank you for your research on landfill searches. I hope that we get more people doing research so we can potentially develop a database, share it with others, so we can grow the information and get it out there so that if they have to do a landfill search, they're not put in the same situation you were that very first time.
Yep. And and that's just it, sharing that information. And if anybody calls me, I use it. To be totally honest, you've got about 30 days. At day 31, your chances really diminish. And I tell them, this is my research. And we talked about the majority of people now understand how to do a search, like modeled after 9/11. But it's that carrying on and what do you need? And, I never thought about the tetanus shots. I never thought about, gosh, we need to have them wash their hands because they're dealing with trash, even though they have gloves on, and just those little things. And that whole list of things is out there now because that's how we did it.
Nice. All right, Brian, thank you very much.
You bet. It's been my pleasure.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Please leave a rating or review and share this episode and podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues.